What are your night shift horror stories? Oh man, I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above, and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walk back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule: if it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or flipping with the locals. Y'all, he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty, came back again, and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home, but that seemed strange given it was around 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past, as security knew him. Was running the register at 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running in to produce carrying mop handle screaming "You mother flipper." Out of sight, he keeps yelling "flipper" and smacking handle at something for like 5 minutes. I'm ringing up customers and freaking out because he was losing his mind, but I'm not interested in getting involved in a murder, so I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 am. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning, because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers. But all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a decedent to the morgue and, right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer, their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. I worked in a residential treatment center for teen girls. One girl with some severe trauma rape abuse came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door coming at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. Leaving one night from work I was followed by a log truck, and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car, rocking it. Thing was, there was twisty turns ahead. Couldn't find the truck. Update. No, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill which the route is slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Grapevine or 4th of July pass. It was just hauling butt. They were running bobtail. Usually if a truck loses brakes the driver would probably engage engine brakes and downshift. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late, and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away, so I could let the truck stay on, so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mac things loud. As I'm nodding off, there was a very loud bang, and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe/rear/headlight and started looking around, and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the crap out of me. More of a very weird event. Sometimes work night shifts. One time was going home around 4 AM or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. Person on a bike came out of nowhere, said he remembered me from middle school, even said the right school name, and rode off. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station/truck stop I worked at, alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 PM, when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's number's still in my phone. Anyhow, he is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death. Back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10, if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly crusty package. Had to chase him off every night, so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, like as if I hated homeless people or treat them like trash, when in actuality I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. Worked a parking garage at the airport, cleaning the top deck, and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in a hole they had torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November, and it was April, so everything was just thawing and breaking down. Used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part this wasn't really a problem. Typically nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get to, but the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them a flippin' hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation, where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape too. Like, far gone into whatever inebriation, that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after that, for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel, and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, what about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy? Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks, and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is, so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 PM, my manager answers a desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, let me guess you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings? The man immediately hangs up the phone. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some butthole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off, and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of flipping nowhere, Australia. I was the overpass operator, keep the overpass playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music, and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night, when the roo shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me barefoot and half asleep when this 6 feet tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog, and the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking crap off desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside, where, I'm assuming, the poor thing, the kangaroo, was shot. Then I had to call my boss. Edit. Bandit. The dog was fine. She lived a long and healthy life, occasionally being bullied by our pet cock HEL. Pet taxa /K5LLG7M. Warning. Medical gross stuff incoming. And X200B. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle vs 75 miles per hour head first to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of Crawford we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all the blood, those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil, trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out, just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Like and subscribe for more videos.